Welcome to Trench Diaries. Sword Beach, Part 1. I was a lieutenant of artillery with the 716th Infantry Division based at Merville near Franceville. In my area of responsibility, the static Atlantic wall defenses were generally speaking of two classes: coastal fortifications and beach fortifications. The coastal fortifications were large fortress-type batteries equipped with heavy caliber guns, usually of naval origin, being guns of up to 21 cm caliber as one would find on a light battleship. These coastal batteries were either in clifftop locations or slightly inland, and they were in some cases quite large fortresses, containing 10 or more sub-bunkers of varying designs. These sites were supplemented by the beach or land sites, which were intended to fire on craft approaching at much closer range or at targets actually on the beaches. These sites were mostly equipped with 88mm or 75mm pack-type guns and supplemented by machine gun positions to prevent infantry assault. These bunkers sometimes extended some distance inland in layers or belts, with the additional use of flooded land, obstacles and minefields to break up any attacking force and manipulate its progress to the defender's advantage by pushing attackers into the line of fire of the pack guns. The Merville battery was somewhat unusual in that it was some distance inland from the shore and was equipped with comparatively light guns, because the heavier guns it was intended to house were not yet ready for installation. So it was that I was assigned to the Merville battery as a gunnery command officer in early 1944, while it was still being completed. My role was to command the use of one of the guns in a heavy concrete casemate. The battery consisted of a group of reinforced concrete bunker buildings on a plateau facing towards the sea in the distance. There were 4 main gunnery bunkers, each one originally designed to be equipped with a 21 cm naval gun, with an arc of fire of 90 degrees. In reality, from my arrival to the invasion itself, the bunkers were equipped with much smaller guns of only 10 cm caliber. This was an interim measure. We were still waiting for the real guns, as we called them, to be fitted when the invasion happened. As things stood, we would be able to fire on the beach zone forward of us and against any movement inland from the beaches over the plateau. That was our role. These guns were sighted in concrete casemates and fired through a horizontal embrasure. They had a steel shield on the gun itself. In addition, there were 10 other bunker buildings which had various uses, including range-finding domes, flak guns of 88mm and 20mm caliber, ammunition storage, water supply, mess hall, power generator, command center, and so on. The bunkers were connected by trenches covered with concrete and steel slabs, and the artillery bunkers had underground chambers intended for use in prolonged siege-type situations as medical centers. The concrete used for the walls and roof of the bunkers was about 1 meter in thickness, reinforced with metal rods. The bunkers had a rounded design intended to offer optimal resistance to blast forces. In the rear, facing away from the sea, the bunkers had access doors of armor plate and electric fan ventilators ducted to the outside. The battery had a complement of some 100 men in all. These were chiefly gunnery crews, of course, such as my team, but also included staff officers and their assistants, medics, cooks, observation teams, maintenance teams, and guards with sidearms. It was intended that the battery could remain under siege for up to 3 months, with sufficient rations and generator fuel kept on site for this event. The water supply came from an aquifer and could not be interrupted. It was a remarkable structure, and it was featured prominently in propaganda of the time. It was built in early 1944 by forced labor, of course. The bunkers were very well planned and constructed and gave us all great confidence. It is no exaggeration to say that we felt impregnable there on the plateau. The danger in such a feeling, obviously, is that a fortress itself may be impregnable, but if it can be surrounded and isolated, there is a risk. Talking about the morale, the spirit in the bunkers in the summer of 1944, just before the invasion, we were eager to take delivery of the larger guns and install them in the bunkers. We were rather embarrassed about the smaller guns we had, but this was what we had. The spirit was very positive. Our troops at the bunker were not frontline soldiers, but morale was excellent nonetheless. We took care to keep the battery troops fully educated on their mission, both tactically and in terms of the direction of the war. You might be curious of what message I conveyed to them about their purpose in manning this fortress. But before I answer this simple question, let me give you some background to the morale issue. Let me firstly say that, contrary to what some people may believe today, the mood in early to mid-1944 among the German forces was not disheartened. Far from it. It is true that we had lost the North African oil supplies, but, equally, the American arrival in Tunisia had been unimpressive. Italy was holding firm, and the Allies were expending huge resources on the war there for no great purpose at all. The Allies showed no signs whatever of doing the logical, rational thing and invading the south of France. There was certainly concern about the Eastern Front, and we all knew dreadful stories about the intensity of the fighting over there, but the disastrous collapse of the Army Group Central in Russia had not yet happened. Above all, we in the officer class were well informed enough to know that the underlying trends in the war situation were far from discouraging. Industrial production was not only holding firm under the air bombing, but actually rising in early 1944. And the air bombing itself had hardened the men's anger at the Allies and their resolve. Everyone, and I mean everyone, had lost civilian relatives, friends and neighbors to the bombing. Most importantly, however, was the matter of the German weapons and machines. The regime had shown us photographs and films of the platoons of the enormous Tiger II Panzers and the Messerschmitt 262 jet aircraft, and we knew about the new, supersized U-boats of the Type 21 designs entering service. The regime had also deliberately spread rumors about the presence of futuristic rocket weapons which could cross entire continents or oceans. We found out later in June that these already existed and were actually stationed close to us in France, and they were called V1. These weapons were more advanced than anything the Allies possessed, and we were sure of that, and that there were constant themes of Wunderwaffen in the state propaganda, hinting that these machines, which we already knew about, were simply the forerunners of what Germany would soon produce. Today, of course, we know that this was mistaken, and that the practical ingenuity of our engineers had already peaked in mid-1944 with the V1 and the V2. From then on, everything was purely designs on paper. But we must remember the great boost that these weapons and hoped-for weapons gave to our morale at the time. All of this we condensed into our message to our artillery troops who manned the battery bunkers. We did not have political education in the way that the Red Army had this, but we included these ideas in our address to the teams at inspection and training times during the day. The troops were very receptive, very motivated, and discipline was good. I'm not exaggerating when I say that the general spirit in the bunker was first class. As to our relationship with the local French civilians, this is a difficult question. The battery was intended to be a sealed unit, and obviously no civilians were allowed near its perimeter. I think the exclusion distance was about 500 meters. But 100 men must be allowed a certain relaxation, and there was a tendency for some men to visit the local towns. Not at night, that wasn't permitted, but in their leave periods in the day, they would visit. Our guards would double as police and patrol these towns, and any drunkenness was punished. Nevertheless, there were cases of venereal disease associated with the towns, and we learned that certain men were forming relationships of the improper nature with French women that they met in their leave hours. This was an obvious security risk, and for this reason, from March 1944, leave visits to the towns were blocked. To compensate for this, we installed a cinema facility in the mess hall and a football pitch behind the battery. Of course, this wasn't entirely effective compensation, and some men were grumbling and wisecracking, of course. Let us now talk about June the 6th of 1944. Yes, you must give me a moment to collect my thoughts, because this day was so revolutionary, if that is the right word. There was no specific bulletin from the commanders saying, "Prepare for invasion on the 6th, if that is what you are thinking. Our alert level was raised to level 2, with level 1 being the highest, on the weekend before the invasion, but this had happened before without consequence. What we were informed of, and this was very useful, was the high level of Allied bombing along the northern French coast and inland at transport junctions. This bombing had been visible to us locally through the April-May period, with large fleets of aircraft overhead and the noise of bombs to the south and east. We were informed daily of the increasing intensity of this bombardment, and we drew our own conclusions that this suggested an attack would be made imminently. At the same time, in the first days of June, the sea in front of us became surprisingly low in activity. We noticed a definite reduction in reports of enemy shipping passing between England and France. This seemed suspicious rather than reassuring, as if the Allies were concealing something. With all these things put together, the evening of June the 5th was tense and expectant, just like June the 4th and 3rd and the days before. I myself was on duty in the night of the 5th and 6th. My bunker was the most westerly of the 4 heavy gun bunkers. The bunker itself was actually quite cramped inside, because the walls were so thick and the ceiling was low. Its interior space was about 10 meters by 20 meters, and the breech of the gun took up a lot of the space. This gun was installed on a turntable, which rotated left and right in the concrete floor. The shells were kept behind metal shields on the wall beside the gun, and there was a mechanical lift to hoist ammunition from the underground chamber up to the firing platform. There was also a metal trap door, giving access by steps to the underground rooms, which were equipped for a siege. I had a control section in the rear of the bunker, equipped with a phone to the battery's central command, but my preference when on duty was to be at the embrasure, observing the plateau and the sea with binoculars, and then moving around the interior, checking on the men's readiness. We had machine gun teams in concrete and sandbagged circles at the perimeter of the battery, and these reported to us at intervals. The slopes in front of us were mined with anti-personnel mines and protected with barbed wire to prevent infantry assault. The 5th of June was a cool evening, and there was some mist on the sea. It became a rainy night and the moon was full. But at about midnight, we were bombed for about 20 minutes by aircraft at high altitude. Our flak gun's searchlight could not locate the bombers. Fortunately, these bombs did not damage our bunkers other than throwing debris in through the apertures, which was soon cleared away. After that, the noise of aircraft, which had been noticeable, became very conspicuous indeed. The noise suggested even more air activity than on the previous nights. I have heard people say that there was no Luftwaffe, or the Allies controlled the air, but in my case I clearly saw through the embrasure a twin-engined night fighter pursuing an Allied bomber out over the sea and shooting it up with tracer. Both aircraft went off into the clouds, firing at each other. After that, there were long pathways of aircraft going in both directions overhead, far more intense even than the regular raiding formations. We also had a phone contact from a battery to the east, saying that gliders and paratroopers were being sent behind the coastal zone. When I heard that report, I put my men on maximum alert and brought up the second shift of men from the barracks behind the battery to act as external guards and replacement crews. I also ordered ammunition to be brought up from the underground chamber, gas masks to be ready, and the periscope rangefinders to be raised, which were projecting up, looking over the embrasure. All this was in place by about 1 a.m., so we were well prepared. The men ate a meal at about the time, that being soup in canisters from the canteen, as well as cheese and the excellent French bread, which was brought in each day. I remember this meal well. The sea wind was coming in through the embrasure, and our interior lights were all off, so we were lit only by the moonlight through the concrete slit. The men ate in an eager way, as if they wanted all possible energy for the fight that we all suspected lay ahead of us. That is the way it seemed to me at the time. I personally had some soup in a flask, I remember. I also took a minute in the command post at the back of the bunker to write a few words to my wife, and I placed this letter in a metal cigarette case in my tunic left chest pocket. Like many troops, I partly hoped that, in the event of my death, my wife would somehow receive the letter. I also partly believed the old soldier's story that the power of such a letter being placed over my heart would deflect shrapnel or bullets. Just as I buttoned my pocket, we heard firing from outside the bunker. This sound was only distant, but it was definitely there. It appeared to be coming from the land side, not the sea or the plateau. At the same time, I received a phone call telling me that paratroopers were landing and moving outside the battery to the southeast. I told the men that action was imminent and to remember their training and responsibilities. They saluted all at once and went to their posts. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy this channel, you know how the algorithm works. Like, comment, subscribe. It means a lot to me. See you in the next video.